Good afternoon, New York time, and good morning and middle of the night around the world. As we host this Put Our Kids First Summit in global time zones starting at 8:30 in the morning in Brisbane, Australia, which was last night, New York time. For the 3 days that we have, we're going to be bringing in experts who can bring all different uh, perspectives to the issue of children, crimes against children, and digital technology. I'm going to introduce you to someone who is a dear friend, as well as someone who has a very important voice and role to play in all of this. And her name is Leah Parsons. And Leah, there you are. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So Leah's from Canada. She's from the Halifax area. And we met shortly after the death of her daughter, Rehtaeh. And it was a tragic, tragic incident. And Rehtaeh was this wonderful, brilliant, caring, empathetic girl who just was knocked around so often that she decided she couldn't continue living. And in it was 2013.
Yes.
In 2013, she ended up taking her life about 2 years after the incident had occurred. Is that right, Leah?
Yeah, 17 months.
17 months. So I'm going to let Leah tell you the story of Rehtaeh, who she was, why she was so special, and what happened that caused her to think that she had no option but to take her own life.
So I'm going to sum it up pretty succinctly, I guess. So Rehtaeh was a 15-year-old girl, just graduated from high school, on top of her class, honors, really looking forward to her high school years and wanting to go into the sciences and wanted to go into marine biology. So she had a big, big heart, always did from a very young age. Lots of empathy. She connected to people and to animals. She was artistic, but she was very bright and very articulate. And we lived in the same community her whole life. She had the same group of friends. And when she went into high school at 15, still the same community. But of course, like many other high schools, you have feeder schools amalgamated in. You're trying to learn who you are, who you want to become. I call it the bricks and mortar of your being. Of course, we all remember going through the teenage years in that way. So I call it the bricks and mortar of life, trying to figure out who you are, what you're going to like cement in there and what you're going to leave out. And are we still there?
You're absolutely there. Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's fine.
Okay. The screen went completely dark, so I didn't know.
Oh, it worked here.
Oh, okay. I'm like, what? So what happened then going into high school is she met a few new friends, of course, and she asked in November of that year. So high school started in September. In November of that year, she asked if she could have a sleepover at one of these new friends. So I asked the parents, and yes, it was okay. It was only one community over. So that was on a Saturday. So that Saturday afternoon, her and her friend went to a home where two brothers lived, and somebody introduced vodka. And they started drinking vodka. And of course, everything I taught Rehtaeh about staying safe, about what, the rape culture, we didn't have that name for it back then, but I always talked to her about these things. So when the alcohol entered her system, of course, everything I taught her kind of went out the window because she was too intoxicated to be able to trust her own body and her own awareness at that time. So what happened next is that two other boys showed up. So now there's four boys, two girls, intoxicated. And again, I lost my screen again. I don't know what's happening there. So the girl that was with Rehtaeh left.
Oh, now you're not frozen anymore. It's still going. If I'm not getting audio, I'll warn you.
Okay, because it's turning black on me. So what happened is the girl that was with Rehtaeh left. So now there was 4 males and 1 Rehtaeh, and Rehtaeh was raped that night by those 4 males. A photo was taken of one of the sexual assaults, and within days, that photo was being shared in her school, in her community, and in outside of that community. So suddenly, I had a pretty confident girl trying to find her way, struggling to survive each and every day. So it was very traumatic to see what happened to her and how she was raging through these emotions, and how the photo was never contained for the 17 months that she struggled to live. So she tried really hard to keep getting back up. She changed schools. We went to the police. We put her in the mental health system to try to get her some help around these emotions that she often shared, that she was too young to be feeling these so many emotions for someone so young. So she was able to verbalize and kind of articulate all the scary things that were going on throughout her day, but she would cycle anger, depression, sadness, fear, just anxiety, and she was totally traumatized and we were trying to find our way. And 17 months later, in a moment of anger, and I know that she would have changed her mind the next moment, Rehtaeh died by suicide, and then the trajectory of a whole new path for her community and for her family started from there. So that's like the Reader's Digest version.
And it's such a tragic story. I met you and Glenn not long after. I was keynoting an event on cyberbullying for the province of Nova Scotia, and we met before my keynote, and I have loved and respected you since then. Before we get into more about the situation of Rehtaeh and so many other girls in particular, but boys as well, who have faced sexual exploitation online. You have now changed a lot of the things you were doing. You were working with rescue dogs or dog rescue in those days. And now you're doing grief counseling and doing a lot of it online. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing now.
So yeah, I do a lot of speaking across Canada at different conferences. So I do speaking at like trauma, resiliency conferences. I've spoken at police conferences in the schools, but these days I'm doing a lot of things around grief workshops, grief retreats, working one-on-one with people in their grief, because there's one thing I've learned in the last 7 years, that we don't have to stay stuck in our spiral and what I call our pain stories. We all have pain stories, but I find when you're in deep trauma and grief, that spiral of getting up every day and spiraling in those same thoughts and keeping us emotionally stuck in our mind and our body and our soul, I know that we can move through that. So I'm pretty passionate about helping people move past and get out of that spiral of pain. So these days I'm focusing more on that, because energetically that feels better for me to do that type of work.
And you have 2 other extraordinary daughters, but your younger one is one of my favorite people in the world. Would you tell us a little bit about her and her special role in making humanity more human?
So Tegan, my youngest, is 10. She's definitely does not fit into any kind of boxes. She's outspoken. She's definitely an advocate for stepping in when she feels people are being treated unfairly. She definitely hangs out with what people would see as the underdog at school. Like, she's a real she has her own Teganisms that I post on Facebook, because she has a wisdom about her, and she has a spunk about her that I want to cultivate and keep, while keeping her. It's a really fine line, right? Like, allowing her to be that spunk, but also she has to kind of conform a little bit so she gets along in school too.
Yeah, that I know that's more your issue. I love the spunk part. I remember when we first met, that day when I was talking to you and Glenn in that classroom before the summit in Nova Scotia. And I remember you were telling me that Tegan had said to you that she needed a map. And you said, a map for what? And she said, I need a map to heaven. and you looked at her, and she was still so young. I guess she was 4, and she was so young that Teganisms weren't, wasn't a copyrighted term yet. And you said, a map to heaven, and she said, yes, I need to be able to find Rehtaeh. And I've known you for 7 years, and I've got to tell you that I am so proud of how you are able to heal and see this, but I can't. I see Rehtaeh's case as personal, and when I ever think about Tegan and her map to heaven, I still own the domain name. We're going to build it one of these days. But it's so important that we recognize the cost, not just to kids like Rehtaeh, of being, raped, drinking. Who knows if date rape, drugs were involved? Who knows what happened? So much of her recollection was gone after it, but she was raped, and somebody took a video and put it online, and we're bragging about it. And that's a terrible thing. But we need to also recognize that it leaves behind parents and little girls like Tegan who are missing a sister. And so the cost is very high here. The summit is all about sexual exploitation, and people often categorize Rehtaeh's case as a cyberbullying related suicide. Do you consider it that, or do you consider it a sexual exploitation related suicide, or both?
I think it's probably both, but thank you for recognizing the trauma that is impacted on the family and the siblings, because I find that that's often overlooked. People look to the parents, and they're so, they send a lot of love and accolades to the parents, but they often forget about the siblings, and the impact on her siblings is so huge. So I'm always trying to be the best version and role model for them to see that we can still have a life. And for Tegan, especially because she's so vocal, the impact that she shares is still, like, to this day, it's still very traumatizing to her. So thank you for recognizing that. That is an area that people overlook. And as far as I try to separate it out sometimes to think about, because I talk about it a lot in terms of sexualized violence, and not so much in the cyberbullying. But when I separate it out and I think about the sexualized violence portion of it, if that photo wasn't shared and she was sexually violated, I feel like she would still be here today. I definitely feel like she would have been, a long time recovering from such a trauma. But I feel like the added shame and the targeting and the way people turned against her and really kind of honed in on someone who was so traumatized and hurting, and used it to really kind of exemplify what's happening in our world online and social media, and it tells us how much pain children are in today, how much they don't value themselves, how much they get that adrenaline of harming somebody else. So I feel like those actions is what made Rehtaeh's journey so unbearable that she couldn't live anymore. So when I separated out, the sexualized violence is so huge. So I talk about that a lot with youth, and especially with young boys, because when I talk and I tell the story, and I'm able to then break it down and how they're objectifying women every day, how they view women every day, how it's a fine line between the objectification of women and then jumping over to okay to rape somebody. Like, there's a fine line there when we're kind of conditioning males to think of women as objects. Because if Rehtaeh was seen as someone that needed help that night and not an object to conquer, then I wouldn't even be in this situation right now, because somebody would have helped her, because they would have said, oh my gosh, she needs help. Let's call her parents, let's call somebody, let's get her to safety, instead of seeing her as an object. So it's all layered for sure. But
and it is.
yeah.
And Leah, a lot of people in the community online were starting to attack Rehtaeh, and blame her. And I think it's, you deserved it because you're wearing a short skirt kind of mentality that belongs perhaps, if ever, in the 50s. And I always see Rehtaeh as a victim of hate, a victim of radicalization, and people were empowered behind the screen to take pot shots at a little girl who should never have had to face a rape, should never have been given alcohol at the age of 15, should have been supervised. The parents in the home. Where in the heck were the parents? You had called and checked, and poor boys in the house. I mean, something's wrong here. And you didn't have a great deal of support and help from the RCMP and law enforcement either, did you?
Absolutely not. No, the case just dragged on. So we were just flailing, thinking, like, how can this even be possible that this photo is still being shared, that no charges have been laid, that nobody has interviewed those males? Like, it was just so shocking to me to be in the year 2011, 12, and for this to be what was happening. Like, I was always shaking my head going, how is this possible?
And
Like, how can yeah.
it's frightening. And Alan and I, as you know, received the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Child Recovery Award for the work we did on child protection. And when we learned about Rehtaeh's case, we started making phone calls because it was shocking, especially coming from Nova Scotia and the Maritimes, where people look to Prince Edward Island and Green Gables, people who are kind, the end of the Underground Railroad, where people are known for being kinder and more understanding. Rehtaeh's case speaks very loudly. So Anonymous actually got involved and got law enforcement to start looking at this, didn't they?
Yes, Anonymous got involved. So what happened is afterwards, one of the males reached out to me and in a Facebook message and said he wanted to meet with me and explain to me how he didn't rape Rehtaeh. So in that exchange, I was like, of course, I'm not meeting you, but if you have anything to say, you can say it here. So in that exchange back and forth, he filled in all the blanks that Rehtaeh couldn't remember. And it made if we could have put the two, like what Rehtaeh remembered and what he was telling me side by side, you'd see the clear picture of what happened that night. But he didn't think what was happening was rape. So even though she was getting sick out a window when this photo was taken, he was adamant that it wasn't rape, even though he was the one in the picture. So with that, I brought that information to the police, and the case was reopened. Of course, Rehtaeh is deceased. So the case was reopened at the same time Anonymous came in, was putting a lot of pressure to let people know that they were watching and they could access emails to the RCMP and the school to see what had really gone wrong here. So there was a lot of pressure, and then the public was getting outraged. So all of a sudden we had a lot of people getting outraged about why this case was handled the way it was handled.
I still never full resolution, still never justice. So you do a great deal on mindfulness now, don't you? I mean, when we sat together at my cottage on PEI, overlooking the water and the beach and the eagles in the background, you were calm in a way that I don't think I could ever be. And you've used and tapped into the power of mindfulness and yoga and meditation. How could that help others, other parents and other youth that are involved in all of this?
Well, yoga saved my life. I say that all the time. So not yoga necessarily the postures of yoga, but going into the place, opening the door and going into yoga. Because I knew pretty quick, I don't know how many months it was that I found yoga. I knew that I was spiraling down pretty fast, and I didn't know that I was going to be able to make it. And I was desperate for anything to help me, guide me on my path, because I didn't know. I almost felt like Rehtaeh. I didn't know how I was going to get through each day. So to me, how does that mindfulness and being connected to your, what I call your soul, your essence, your sense of being, your higher self, your inner guidance, whatever that is for you, we all know what that is, because we've all have found it in our life at different places and different times, and maybe it's only a few minutes here and there, but when we all of a sudden feel a sense of peace and a knowing. So to me, I wanted to know more of that. And it helps people because no matter what's going on in the world, the peace has to come from within. So we have to go inside and uncover these layers of societal roles that we have, of these pain stories that I call pain stories. And we have to be able to kind of unravel that and to tap into something bigger than ourselves. And to me, I think everybody needs to be able to do that, especially in a world where we're focusing on the external world all the time. We have to be able to go in and tap into what that is. And a lot of people are afraid of that. They're like, oh, that's for you, but my mind's too busy. Everybody's mind is busy until you train it not to be busy. So we can turn it on and get busy when we need to do things, but our mind needs to be trained just like our muscles, just like everything else. If we don't pay attention to it, it's going to take us into all kinds of places that aren't really the healthiest.
I know that you run a service on Facebook Live. So please do a plug for what you're doing, because I think that your essence, your aura, your inner calm has been so helpful to so many who haven't faced the level of devastation you have. So how can people find you to engage in what you're teaching?
You can find me pretty easily on Facebook, Leah Parsons. I'm there. I teach a membership online program about how can we kind of live from a different place. I also do one-on-one soul coaching. And again, soul coaching can mean whatever that word means to you. And I do presentations and workshops, and people can book me. I'm in the middle of making my own website, Leah Parsons, but I do have a Rehtaeh Parsons website. You can also reach me there. So you just rehtaehparsons.ca and any email would come to me.
Maybe I'll talk you into doing a LinkedIn Live session on mindfulness, just a little bit, so they can get a taste of this. When you were at my cottage, which is supposed to be a place of comfort and kindness, and never is because I'm there and it's always chaos, you bring that with you. So what could have happened to perhaps save Rehtaeh's life? If we could rewrite one thing, what would it be?
That the police took action and charges were laid and that photo was contained. Yeah. That would have saved it.
Yeah. So justice, just somebody doing their job. And that was so hard. You know, I don't know the facts of this, but I kind of think that perhaps the boys their families had more influence than you did. You and Glenn are sort of normal people. And perhaps that's why it didn't happen, which, if that's the case, I'm very sad about. I don't want you to comment on that. What's your hope going forward?
My hope going forward is that we can change the dialogue of young people of how they view females, so that we see everybody as just human beings, kindness and compassion, and that no matter what people are going through, to know that they're not alone. Like those things are so important to me, and to help people shift and to live the best life they can, no matter what their circumstance, that we can embrace and change with education, and we just have to reach people in a different way, I think.
You know, we're working with a social worker who's one of the leading experts in the world on radicalization and use of digital technology. He's out of Indiana. His name's Michael Ross. I want you to meet each other. And Michael talked to me before I went into a school in New Jersey that I've been working with. I said, what do you want me to ask these kids? And he said, ask them about loneliness. So I said, okay. And I went into a group of kids, middle income, blue collar, every shape, size, color you could possibly imagine. 3 kids in this school in 7th to 8th grade have undergone gender surgery, gender transformation surgery at a very young age. And they get along so well. They respect each other, whether they're from India or they're from Pakistan, from South Africa, from the Caribbean, from the Middle East, from China, or Poland, wherever their families are from, who may be less tolerant. These kids are incredibly tolerant in the school. And I said to them, why is this working here differently than any place else? And they said, Well, we know how things are at home and we can't change our parents, but we can change ourselves. And this is the life we want to have. And I said, well, how does loneliness fit into this? And they all looked at me and they said, it's everything. If you're lonely, you're going to engage in activities that might be high risk. Maybe you know you shouldn't do, hoping that people will like you or include you. You may be looking for support from gangs and hate and radicalization groups to feel included. You might be excluded, and that's why you're lonely. And you may lash out because you're angry. You may hurt yourself because you're hopeless. And we had an amazing conversation about loneliness. And 2 hours ago, we had the commander of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force in the New York metropolitan area, John Pizzuro. And he's a mindfulness expert too. And I thought he'd be talking about crimes against children and what's happening where, and TikTok and Instagram. And instead, he talked about the frontal cortex and all these words I didn't understand as he talked about the disconnect between reality and digital, and how everybody looks so happy and pretty and thin online, but that's not real life. And how Rehtaeh battled for 17 months against the power of digital technology to broadcast hate and make her a topic of conversation and thrills. And the fact that she lived for 17 months after the assault during all of this is a miracle in itself. I can't ever talk to you without ending up in tears. I need Tegan. I need her as part of our cyber safety agents. I need to stay closer in touch with you, even though I've been out of Canada for about a year.
We miss you.
Oh gosh, I miss you too. I'm just sort of angry right now about some issues, so I'm having a temper tantrum and staying in New Jersey.
Yeah.
But it's time that we take our souls and our mental well-being and our mindfulness and tap into that power to make sure that we can survive difficult times of coronavirus and hate and bigotry and radicalization and attacks and intolerance. If we can't reach into ourselves for strength and turn to each other for support, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So thank you for what you're doing. And I am so sorry and heartbroken that I never got to meet Rehtaeh, because she would be one of my best volunteers.
It'd be awesome. Yeah. But Tegan would definitely be up for that, I think. That's her style. Yeah.
I need her, and she's seen some of the videos with Joe teaching cyber safety. He's our golden doodle cyber safety service dog. And so thank you so much for joining us and for providing the human piece of the loss that so many of us feel. And tell Tegan and her older sister that I love them. They're lucky to have you as a mom. Tell Tegan I'm waiting for her. I need her help to change the world.
I will definitely tell her that. She's upstairs singing. Thank you.
I love you.
Love you too. Bye.